start streaming now to go live. Okay, so now we're back up again. Like, refresh the page, maybe? Like, who would think, oh, let's create, like, a beautiful classical rendition of, like, a bad pop earworm? Like, I just don't agree with that. And then to play it at, like, an event with people telling, like, really important, cool stories. Does that work?
No.
Why is that? It's so weird. Oh, I see. Yikes. Okay, so I think what we need to do in the next 15 minutes is get a hold of the Go link and put this in the new Go link. That's what we need to do. Okay, so video link, right? Okay, and then how do you edit a Go link?
So you have to be an owner. I don't know who
Right.
It's
well, probably
we may be able to log in because we have this.
Okay, fair. So how do you edit a Go link? Period. I'm sorry, I don't know anything about
this. Go to Middlebury or go. Let's see. Go dot middlebury.edu.
Right. Oh yeah, Liam and I have had to do this a few times.
Self-service.
TEDxMiddlebury.
You go to the self-service shortcut creation interface.
But then this is where I need to log in as whoever owns the Go link.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will get the login info from someone who I'll message now. Okay.
Let's see. Directory update. Yeah, so I'm only.
Okay, so someone won't respond. That should work, but what about the people off campus who are gonna try to tune in? Oh no.
Well, even if you're off campus, if you go .middlebury.
Right, that's true. And that's probably the link that they give everyone, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Hopefully someone gets back to me soon. I can also go talk to link because they gave us a new link for the second half. Oh, okay. Yeah, but we're all set otherwise. Everything's good.
Can I just lift this up now?
Thank you. Okay, cool. Yeah. And then, yeah, view/update, I guess. Awesome.
Okay, I have a lot. This one?
This one, yeah.
Yeah, since we ended the stream, we have to create another one to go live.
No worries though, because we'll just do this, and we should be good. Apply these changes, right? Awesome. So now, thank you. Let's see. Yeah. Go/TEDx. Yeah, it's working. People are just hearing this horrible music. Uh-oh. Please check the video resolution. What's wrong? Which is not optimal. Oh. I guess I could stop playing it, change the bitrate, stop streaming. Or do you think it's not significant? So you don't think it's worth it to reconfigure the bitrate?
We've got a good connection. It was just wanting to set the.
Just this at 737. It says video resolution.
We're getting audio someplace through the camera. We're getting audio from the.
But I think I plugged in. Yeah, this XLR is plugged into the camera. Oh, I see. There's no. Oh, well, we're not getting it from the camera because it'll be from the mics. So when they start, we'll hear it.
Here, let's real quick while we're.
Yeah, this song I actually like. It sounds good, doesn't it?
Oh.
Oh my.
Hello, and welcome to TEDxMiddlebury 2021, Back to Baseline. My name is Irit, and I am one of the board members of TEDxMiddlebury, and I get to be your host for today. We have spent many months preparing for this event, and we cannot be more excited that the day is finally here. So, thank you all for being here. Before we start, we are paused to acknowledge that Middlebury College sits on the land which has served as a site of meeting and exchange among indigenous people since time immemorial. The Western Abenaki are the traditional caretakers of these Vermont lands, waters, which they call Indakina, or homeland. We remember their connection to their region and the hardships they continue to endure. Let us take a moment of silence to pay respect for the Abenaki elders and to the indigenous inhabitants of Turtle Island, past and present. Thank you. We have some accessibility information to share, and we have large printed booklets printed, and if you would like one, please raise your hand, and one of the board members will come and bring you one. The theme this year is Back to Baseline. And to us, Back to Baseline is about taking a step back, re-evaluating and allowing ourselves to reach further than we ever believed we could before. It's about removing ourselves from chaos and finding the light in places that were overlooked. For many of us, this year felt like a time of setback and a call to recharge. But when we were presented by a struggle, how do we rebuild and start anew? Sometimes the brightest inspirations and the ability to see the world in its truest form can only be found when we let go and start over. I have a few logistics. Please take a moment to turn off your phone. From my own personal experience, you do not want to be the one scrambling to silence your phone, so make sure it's off. Feel free to take any pictures if you want. We have a professional photographer also making pictures, and those will be publicly available after the event. And instead of a Q&A section, we're going to have very brief reflections after each speaker. So take a moment to think about the speech and what does it make you think of, and please feel free to share after each speaker. Before we start our event, we would like to share with you a very brief video from the TED organization. So let's get started. And this year, we are very proud to announce that all of our speakers are from our own Middlebury community. Our first speaker is Janae Dew. Janae Dew identifies as a queer, fat, disabled black woman, born and raised in Wisconsin. She was the first in her family to earn a bachelor's degree from University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, where she studied English and Women's Studies and she received a Master of Education in Student Affairs from Iowa State University. Janae is currently the Assistant Director of the Anderson Freeman Resource Center, and she loves being involved in the community with local organizations such as Addison Central Teens and Ideal Middlebury. She dedicates her time outside of work providing social justice education to community members and advocating for the creation of community care structures. She values storytelling and personal connection and uses her lived experiences to help others explore topics around privilege, identity, oppression, and marginalization. Janae cares deeply about inclusive and intentional language, media representation and popular culture, intersectional feminism, and fat liberation. Please welcome Janae Du.
I wish I was fat as the first time I thought I was fat. That was a thought that went through my mind the first few years of college, when my body was changing and I was able to be the body that it was supposed to be. I was outside of the structures that were put in place by my mother, outside of the expectations that were put on me by doctors, and I was really able to think about my body and the time and space, and the first time I thought I was fat. I thought that this was a good thing to think about myself. Oh my gosh, I wish I was fat as the first time I thought I was fat. Because the first time I thought I was fat, I had to have been around 10 years old. But in reality, thinking of myself as fat, as a 10-year-old when I was not fat, was only harming my body image. And it was only saying that me being fat was only a negative trait. I should only be as thin as the first time I was fat is really what I was saying. Body positivity, that was my first step into body positivity. I was really able to then finally reflect on my body and what it meant to have my body, a fat body. But I soon realized that body positivity was not the space for me. You see, body positivity was created in the 1960s by fat activists, specifically fat Black women. And they created a space specifically to carve out space for people with non-normative and marginalized bodies, like trans people, disabled people, and fat people. And for the sake of the conversation tonight, we're going to be focusing on fat people. The space that they carved out wasn't only for self-acceptance and a place to be positive and feel good. It was really there to help disrupt the structures and barriers that were put in place to keep fat people out of access. When we think of body positivity today, you might think of the perfectly curated Instagram posts, the feed of thin white women contorting themselves to show that sometimes they might look fat. When in reality, body positivity now is just thin white women claiming and convincing themselves that they aren't fat. There is no space for fat people in the body positivity movement any longer, even though that was what it was first created for. Body positivity gaslights us into thinking that we can make systemic change with an individual mindset of just feeling good about our bodies. Because we have to realize that anti-fatness is systemic, and it's rooted in anti-Blackness. Europeans, before the transatlantic slave trade, were fat. It was a sign of wealth and prosperity, and it was the beauty ideal. That is until enslaved African women had similar bodies to their own. And they said, heck no, I'm not gonna look like these people over here. And it created another system of oppression. You see, anti-fatness didn't exist until Blackness did. And the systemic oppression of anti-fatness has persisted to today. Fat people deal with medical mistreatment and misdiagnosis. For example, there was a fat woman a few years ago who went to the doctor with abdominal pain, and the doctor prescribed her diet and exercise. She went home, and we ultimately realized that she had cancer, and she died. Fat people have to deal with the fat tax, similar to the pink tax for women, right? All of our items are a couple dollars more, a little more expensive for the same thing, except it's pink. But the fat tax is the same thing for fat people. Our clothes are a little bit more expensive. And then fat people are shamed for using fast fashion, even though that may be the only size and financially accessible places for fat people to shop. Safety mechanisms, like seatbelts, were not tested on fat bodies. In fact, where a seatbelt is supposed to lay is across your pelvis. So if you're in a collision, it might break your pelvis, but you'll be fine. But for fat people, it's impossible to lay where it's supposed to be. And if we are in a collision, it'll crush our internal organs and we'll die. A safety mechanism was not thinking about fat people, and they do not care that we will die. Medications aren't tested for fat people, like Plan B that only works for people below 170 pounds. And fat people lose out on job opportunities due to stereotypes, like we're unclean or unintelligent or immoral. So you see, it's kind of hard to put a hashtag BOPO post and think that the systemic oppression is just gonna go away. It's kind of hard just to think good thoughts about your body and think that all of these systems are going to disappear. This is not me shaming you if you are accepting yourself, respecting your body, and having a relationship with your body through body positivity. That's great, no shame. But I do want you to really reflect on who is centered in those conversations. Are you centering fat Black women? Are you centering fat people in general? Because realize that not everyone even gets to entertain body positivity. Fat people are not allowed to be body positive. If we are, we're either seen as glorifying obesity or so brave. You're so confident. Can you imagine if someone posted a comment on a thin person and said, "You look so brave. You're so confident." Body positivity was only created, now the space is only created for fat people who want and are willing to lose weight. Fat people who are willing to do what thin people want them to do. Fat people who are willing to put stress upon their bodies So what can we do? If body positivity isn't for fat people anymore, what is there? There's this concept called body neutrality, and it allows us to take the value and morality out of people's bodies. There are no good bodies or bad bodies or immoral bodies, there are just bodies. Every body has the same function. We're all supposed to be inhabited, and we can be grateful for the bodies that we have. But the problem is that not every body has the same access to resources and support. Every body isn't given the same systemic care structures on purpose. And body neutrality allows us to be able to experience our bodies more broadly emotionally. There isn't any guilt or shame by thinking negative thoughts about your body one day. For me, I have chronic pain. So every day, I might be in pain one day, and I'm like, oh my gosh, my body, I feel betrayed by my body. I can't do the things I want to do. I can't do the things I need to accomplish. And body neutrality allows me to think that it is okay to not feel okay about my body. It allows us to know that no bodies are wrong, and it is the systemic barriers put in place that cause us to think that our bodies are wrong. To go even beyond body neutrality, because there's limitations to that too. There are people who feel like they can't take the morality out of their body, the value, maybe because of their disability or their chronic pain, and it's really hard to think that their body is neutral. But fat liberation is a concept driven to let fat people think outside of the binds of thinness, to go outside of the false ideal of thin bodies are acceptable. It allows us to go beyond the stereotypes of immorality and being unintelligent and bad and greedy. Fat liberation allows us to explore beyond diet culture, a billion-dollar industry created for people to yo-yo, gain back weight, lose weight, gain back weight, lose weight, and feel horrible about themselves. It allows us to go beyond exercise as a punishment, only meant to have people lose weight. Where is the pleasure in that? It allows us to go beyond thinking about food as a punishment, as junk, as a moral thing. Because spoiler alert, food is also morally neutral. Eat that slice of pie. Or two. I recently went to a talk and there was a fat activist there, and her name is Reagan Chastain, and she said, "I used to fight my body on behalf of weight stigma, and now I fight weight stigma on behalf of my body." And I think that is the crux of fat liberation. We spend so much energy and time fighting our bodies, causing stress to our bodies, trying to fit into this ideal that is not attainable to so many. I used to fight my body daily to try to be perceived as one of the good fats, one of the good ones, whatever that means. I was in Weight Watchers to try to fit into a prom dress. I wore sweatsuits with ankle and wrist weights and danced to a 1980s Sweatin' to the Oldies with Richard Simmons. There were some bops. But it was still really uncomfortable to have to do that, to try to fit this ideal and standard that my mother had put on me, that doctors have put on me, that peers have put on me. There was this one time when I was in 7th grade band. I played flute, and I love my flute. And I was tapping my foot away, and my friend was watching me, my best friend at the time, and she starts laughing while I'm playing my flute, practicing the music. And I stopped playing, and I said, "What are you laughing at?" She goes, "I can see your belly jiggle." And I just instantly felt self-conscious. I am happy to say today that fat liberation has given me the space to be proud of my jiggling belly and my flappy arms and my back rolls and my double chin. And fat liberation has given us the space to be able to disrupt the systems again, to fight for liberation. And this isn't to say that body shaming is good for anyone, right? Thin people may feel shame around their bodies sometimes. But recognizing that thin people have privilege and they are not oppressed for their bodies. So what I implore for you all today, if you are thin, fight for your fat friends. Fight the brands that you love to have more inclusive, same pricing clothing. Go to the doctor's office with your fat friend and make sure they're being treated correctly. Follow fat activists and scholars and read fat writers. And fat people, it's okay to be fat. It's actually pretty great. And fat people, there are so many ways that you can advocate for yourself too. Request not being weighed in the doctor's office. That is a possibility. You do not have to be weighed. Most medical treatments do not need to know what your weight is to be provided that treatment. But most of all, I want you all to know that you don't have to love your body to be worthy of fighting for. You don't have to love your body to get access to things. And most importantly, you don't have to love your body to love yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Janae. We're going to open it up again for reflections and take a moment to think about the talk and how did it make you feel and what thoughts came up during the talk. If you would like to share, please raise your hand and one of the board members will come with the mic and hand you one. And if it is maybe a little bit intimidating to share for the whole audience, talk among each other, introduce yourself to your neighbor and talk and see what your neighbor thought of the talk and how it made them feel and what thoughts came up for them during the TED Talk.
To the next speaker, or
yes.
You don't think you have
Usman is the next one. I can do that, yeah. I can leave it here and then I'll give it to them.
Okay.
Yeah, it's clean, right? Okay. I can turn it on for him as well.
Okay. Yeah. Or do you want me to come on stage?
That may, no, I think it will work. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, actually maybe that might be easier.
For me to come? Okay.
Yeah.
Then I'll just hold on to it.
Okay. All right, I hope you all had a chance to talk and to reflect on the TED Talk from Janae. We're going to move on to our next speaker. And our next speaker is Usman Ghani. He's a junior at Middlebury College who was born in Karachi, Pakistan, and right now lives in Brooklyn, New York since the age of 9. He is left-handed, and one of his favorite things to do is to use this as an excuse for everything. In his free time, he likes to play video games, crack jokes with his friends, and motorcycle, and watch YouTube videos for hours on end. Through YouTube, Usman discovered the TED Talk account, and he has been watching TED Talks since 2010. At Middlebury, Usman majors in international politics and economics, and he has a minor in theater and an unofficial minor in American studies. He loves to push the envelope and experiment because for him, life is about trying new things and messing around whenever possible. Please welcome Usman Ghani.
Thank you. Real quick, before I get started, I want to share a recent incident with all of you. So I'm very proud to be here today. And as you can imagine, I told my mom, I said, "Hey mom, I'm going to do a TED Talk today." And she looked at me a little puzzled, and maybe it was the phone connection or the fact that my mom's an immigrant. She kind of stares at me for 10, 20 seconds and goes, "What's the big deal about that? Your cousin does like 3, 4 TikToks in a day." Okay. And that's where I'm at right now. All right. My talk is called Spent Cartridges, a look into the changing dynamics between minorities and gun control. So let's get started. College life passes students in the blink of an eye. I could swear that just 2 days ago, I was a first year having the hardest time navigating myself to Proctor Dining Hall. Maybe one of the reasons it just all passes us by so fast is we try to cram these fun, new activities that make us lose track of the days. For me, if I like something, that is all I do until I get sick of it. My first year, my new fun activity was binge watching Game of Thrones. Right? A lot of fans, I can tell. But yeah, it got to a point where I joined both the equestrian team and the archery club because I wanted to be like this Muslim Jon Snow just in the Vermont wilderness. Except there was one problem. There was no archery club. Disheartened, I decided not to even join the equestrian team because if I can't train like a stork, then what's the point, right? Weeks later, a friend of mine tracked me down in the dining hall, ironically, and said, "There is an archery club, probably look into it." And so I did. This club was called the Middlebury Shooting Sports Club. I was a little off put by it, but I called them up, emailed them, and said, "Hey, I really like to be part of this club, and when are we doing archery?" They told me, "Glad to have you. Archery isn't happening this semester, but you're more than welcome to come to the upcoming shooting event." And my first reaction was, like, shooting? With real guns and bullets? No, thanks, man. As someone who grew up in Karachi and New York City, I had developed a staunch attitude towards gun control. So I told them no, and that was the end of that. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. No, kidding. I decided to go, but this was ultimately after I spoke to a friend of mine who suggested that college was trying new things, and this was a great opportunity to learn from new perspectives. So I went, and it was me, a guy fully dressed in World War II gear. We're talking helmet, jacket, boots, canteen, the whole 9 yards, and the president of the club. Immediately, I knew I made the wrong call, but I decided to stick around. I had so much fun just learning from them and getting to know them that it made the whole experience that much more fun. A year and some conversations later, I was appointed the head of the archery side for that club. Usman, why are you telling us this? Is it to brag about how you're a student leader on campus? No, but thank you for asking. It makes me feel good about myself. I'm telling you this because this is a very important milestone in me learning my journey and my place in what it means to be a minority in this country. See, back in 2018, when I joined this club, it was me and 2 white guys. But just last semester, I processed a record-breaking amount of people of color within this club. What changed? What changed in the last 2 years? Was it me just doing such an awesome job of being the leader of the club? Sadly, no. What changed was a microcosm of a change all throughout America. See, the last year was unconventional for a multitude of reasons. We're going to keep the pandemic aside. I know, big deal. But we're only going to talk about how the American people were seen and shown how the government wasn't there for them. They were shown that they could not be prepared enough for an emergency situation. The government couldn't respond to anything in an effective or timely manner. They couldn't provide energy for Texas or even moral relief to minorities amongst a multitude of injustices. Could this be the reason why Middlebury, one of the most liberal colleges in America, was suddenly ramping up its POC participation rate? Maybe. So I decided to look online, and the initial hypothesis I had was being concurred by the research. In 2020, from January to May alone, there was an increase of 3.7 million background checks, 40% of that being first-time buyers, and 40% of that 40% were women. At this point, I was fully interested in getting to know why my club was getting so much more popularity in Middlebury. And then I thought, Middlebury, that is a school that attracts teenagers from all disciplines, backgrounds, states, and skin colors, except there is a clear majority in who gets in. If you look around yourself today, you'll see that a lot of the people here don't look like me. And yes, to the school's credit, it is honing in on its diversity initiatives to be more representative of the school as a whole and the country. But there are people that get in from California, Massachusetts, and New York, but not in the same way that those states represent minorities. And so in the last 10 to 15 years, there has been an increase, and I believe what I was seeing was that increase rubbing up against Vermont laws. See, Vermont is a constitutional carry, pro-gun state, and for the first time, these students are up close and personal with guns. I believe that this increase that I was seeing was a first major reaction to increased authoritative practices by the government within the last 10 years, whatever it may have been. And so I started researching. I asked some of the people there in the club, because I just wasn't satisfied with the statistics, why was my club getting so popular? I reached out to one of these people. She was a bisexual black woman. I only addressed her race and sexuality because she herself asked me to be fully representative of her identity. I asked her why. In the past, I know you didn't like guns, so what changed? And she answered in a way that was much more nuanced than anything I could ever imagine. She said, in December, I wasn't crazy about the police being the people that came to my aid if I ever needed it. But a part of me liked to believe that if I ever needed the help, I could dial 911 and I would be secure. Except the killings in the last few months have shown me that the government in which I entrust my security, liberty, and life is the one trying to strip it from me. The mission isn't to serve and protect after all. It's to control and oppress. It's been that way for a very, very long time. We're just now seeing it in larger numbers. I was a little taken back and decided to do my own research. I found out that in 1968, the NRA actually supported gun regulation laws because they were threatened by the Black Panthers. Why? Well, they were scared of how photogenic the Black Panthers were with their guns. See, the Black Panthers were a group that liked to publicly display their weapons in the state of California. The NRA didn't like this, and so they urged the government to ban the sale of cheap handguns, which were called Saturday night specials. And they also wanted to leave rifle regulations and machine gun regulations untouched because they were popular amongst the white rural population. I saw this relationship, and it made me think. The Black Panthers picked up their weapons after a spree of unjust actions by the government to protect themselves and their neighborhoods. Maybe, just maybe, the fears that they had in yesterday's government are being echoed by today's teenagers that fear the bleak tomorrow that is to come. I started asking more and more people because at this point, I was fully interested. And we know from earlier, if I get interested, I get obsessed. So I decided to ask more people to see if this was a common concern amongst my peers. I find out that it wasn't as neatly wound up as I thought it would be. It can't be tied up in a box as I initially had thought. I say this because another person was very firm on her position. She told me that abolishing the police is the only real solution. She said the police have used guns as a tool to inflict violence and death upon minorities, especially black people, and that violence stems from wanting to catch runaway slaves. As it was pretty clear how she felt about the police, I asked her how she felt about guns in the country as a whole. She expressed that in the US, it is impossible to take away every American's guns. Sadly, it is ingrained into the culture and the Constitution. So you cannot regulate a fully gun market because the illegal market for them is so widespread and untamable. A war on guns would be just as unwinnable as a war on drugs. She expressed that for her, the racist system needed to go because no matter the weapon, black people were still dying. She also mentioned that ever since the age of 14, she has been carrying around mace because she felt unsafe. She also mentioned that she always felt one step away and one search away from being a statistic. She then went on to cite the most recent killing of Ma'Khia Bryant, who was a 15-year-old who called the police for her own safety, but was instead shot 4 times in the chest and killed brutally in the street. She said, you look at case studies like this and people like this, and you see why there's increased fear amongst the minorities. I kind of took a step back and decided to just ask more people, continue on with my research. I found another person, and this one was the most at odds with their relationship with the subject matter. She said, I belong to a family of veterans, so the issue of guns isn't anything new to me. I understand that guns are a tool for protecting yourself if you're on a war. But in America, right now, they can be used for hunting or killing. And right now, I don't feel good about them being used for killing. And then she mentioned that If she was in a bind, she would feel no hesitation calling the police. But there was a glaring problem in this country about who has access to guns and who doesn't. I took her opinions and I just decided to keep asking another person. And this one was someone that I know very near and dear to my heart. He is someone that I've seen grow from I would consider a child into a man. He lives in the Bronx, and he told me that he hates guns. I reached out to him, knowing him to be one of the most innocent, sweethearted, one of those wouldn't ever step on a butterfly type of people. And then he supplemented what he said by saying, I hate guns, but if it ever got bad, I would carry one. I asked him to explain, and he said, since the discovery of America, black people have been dealt a bad hand. It goes far beyond that, in fact. We aren't allowed to exist peacefully. We have the highest rates of gun possession incarcerations as well as drug possession incarcerations. And neither side of the gun control debate is right for me. Gun control is inherently racist, and freedom to buy guns results in black death. But if I'm sure of one thing, is that if I was to carry a gun and go hunting, there would be a target on my back. But even if I was to go for a walk without any weapon whatsoever, that target would still be there. He wanted to shatter this idea of a stereotype, and that spoke out to me. He said he held off on joining the Middlebury Shooting Sports Club because he didn't want to feed into a stereotype. He said a black man carrying a gun sends signals of danger, and he was concerned for his life nonetheless. But if things got to a point where his security was such a threat, he would consider carrying a gun despite being disgusted by them in the first place. I have to be honest. Hearing him speak that way broke my heart, and hearing every other perspective also did wonders for me to understand what this issue is and how widespread it is. Everyone that joined for the purpose of education. They wanted to better understand what it meant for the United States to have this widespread affliction, understanding, and possession of guns. Most people join to understand community, others to understand history, and some to understand self-defense. Oh, we also can't forget about the ones that joined because archery is just so fun. But it was getting a little dark out there. But I also want to mention that these people that reached out to me reached out with very real fears. I was implored myself to look into specific case studies because people like to pick up their shoulders and say, well, gun owners also have their own fears and they're looking out for their own communities as well. But you look at the killings of 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery, who was gunned down for jogging, or 17-year-old Trayvon Martin, who was gunned down for just taking a walk with a hoodie on. It's clear that there is an undeniable problem with not only the police, but the citizens as a whole that share this mentality. And that fear can be traced right back to stereotypes. I hope what you got out of this talk today was that the seats in which you sit in might be the same as the people we've discussed today, but they are a lot more comfortable. Neither side of the gun control debate is right for the people it affects most. Thank you.
Like before, we are going to open it up for reflections. And please take a moment to think about Usman's talk. What thoughts came up and how did it make you feel? And what lingering questions do you still have? If you feel comfortable, please raise your hand and one of the board members will come and hand you a mic. And please share your thoughts with the audience. And if this might be a little bit intimidating, it might be the right time to introduce yourself to your other neighbor and get to know them, ask them how they thought the talk was and what their thoughts were. Yeah, introduce yourself maybe again if you would like to. right, we are going to move to our last speaker. And our last speaker of the night is Omar Hawam. Omar Hawam is Middlebury's first Arthur Vining Davis Interfaith Fellow. He graduated from Williams College, where he double majored in philosophy and biology, and en route pursuing for his medical degree. Outside of the classroom, Omar served as the co-chair of the Muslim Student Union and the Interfaith Club, where he fostered community across religious and spiritual differences. In his work as Interfaith Fellow, he focuses on exploring where religion, spirituality, ethics, and meaning make a fit in students' daily lived experiences. Omar prides himself on his New Jersey grit, without the road rage, and is always happy to walk and talk about how we navigate life's purpose. Please welcome Omar Hawam.
Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most beneficent. I'd like to take a second and reflect with you all about what I just said. And don't worry, I don't intend on using this platform for religious preaching or theological debate. I'm more interested in reflecting with you all about how you perceived that opening invocation, how I perceived giving that opening invocation. Perhaps some of you may be a bit confused. What's he bringing up God for at this public forum? Maybe some feel alienated. Divine speech or divine talk is no place at a TED Talk. Others may feel like you relate a little bit, maybe even are rooting for me. Yeah, he's willing to talk about God so publicly at this TED Talk. Others may be on to me and realize that this is a usual TED Talk gimmick to grab your attention and to open my invocation for the evening. Something tells me there's truth to all of these, but the real intention was to invoke reactions. Reactions that I'm sure were quite diverse, probably very strong for some, but personal for many. In my role as the Interfaith Fellow this year at Middlebury College, I thought that the majority of my work would be involved in event programming for the different religious and spiritual groups on campus. You know, the kinds of things where we have an interfaith dinner, maybe a volunteer service trip, the kinds of things that would make great pictures for the campus magazine or the chaplain's office brochure or what have you. But truth be told, I wasn't so interested in the event programming side of things. I was more interested in a more authentic interfaith experience, an experience that acknowledges the tensions that lie at the heart of our commonly held ideals of pluralism, cooperation, and even coexistence. And don't worry, I'm not talking about those tensions that we can all easily pull examples from the history of people of religious or non-religious backgrounds as they sorted their differences, to put it very lightly. I'm talking about a more fundamental experience, an experience that lies at the heart of how we view each other more fundamentally. And it's probably useful at this point to tell you that I think the term interfaith is actually deeply unhelpful. And I've tried to distance myself from the term, despite my title as the Interfaith Fellow. And I think it's for a few reasons. I'll share a few. For one, I think the term interfaith makes certain assumptions about the kind of interhuman work that's worth doing. For example, it could be quite exclusionary to people who don't experience their world from a faith background. For example, Buddhists might have a more practice-based way of living. Certainly atheists or agnostics don't have that faith, traditional faith way of viewing their lives or how they engage with the world around them. But it can also be quite alienating to people who do come from a traditional faith background who view the world from multiple lenses and not just the lens of their religion or spirituality. And so the kind of work that I was more interested in doing in my time as the Interfaith Fellow is to look at how we experience the world from our different perspectives, the different lenses with which we engage in the world. Maybe even call it interlens work. The different lenses that we think, act, and feel as we navigate our experiences. For some, that might be through a purely or fairly religious framework. They navigate the world through a religious perspective. For others, it might be through a totally non-religious, non-theistic, non-theological, even non-practice-based way of living. For most of us, it's a mixture of things. Perhaps our religious upbringings may inform our values or our beliefs. For some, maybe that religious upbringing, those values and beliefs, are exactly what we want to define ourselves in opposition to. But the reality is we all have lenses with which we engage in the world. Personally speaking, the lens with which I engage in the world is from a fairly religious one. I view the world under or in the pursuit of the moral and the divine beauty. And if it's not how I usually navigate things, it's how I want to navigate things. It's a belief that we are all under the divine gaze, and that's actually how I think the world works. That not just me, when I'm giving the speech, there's a spiritual, religious dimension to it that includes you all and the wider world and the universe as well. But perhaps there are others who are viewing this speech from a totally different perspective, from the perspective of it's just a cool TED Talk, and there's no, strings attached theologically or spiritually. Perhaps there are some who are viewing this talk from the lens of a different divine gaze. Maybe we'll call it Brahman, whereas I might call it Allah. Regardless, we are viewing things from different lenses. And I think that's kind of strange if you think about it, just a little bit, maybe even funny. Can you imagine that perhaps the person, 2 rows or 2 seats away from you is, let's say they're a pre-med and they're pursuing a medical career. And their best reason for pursuing a medical career is in pursuit of glorifying their Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Whereas maybe 2 rows up or down from them is another pre-med who views pursuing a career in medicine as purely a means to help their fellow human. Let's say they're a secular humanist of sort. No divine strings attached. Once again, we have different lenses with which we engage in the world. Now, I think that's quite compelling. And there might be some more mainstream ways of viewing the world. Perhaps my version of a divine gaze might not be the common mainstream way that most people think about their experiences. And I want to emphasize a lot of my work was not focused on things like who's the right perspective or the wrong perspective, which one makes more sense, less sense, which one is more or less reasonable. The kind of work that I focused on was trying to engage with questions like, what are the kinds of lenses that exist out there? How welcomed are those different perspectives and lenses? How do they interact with each other on a day-to-day, if they do at all? And if there are any similarities or differences, perhaps some of those differences could be quite severe and cause tensions. How do we navigate those instances where there are tensions between different lenses or perspectives in the world? I'll address some of those questions perhaps from a more personal example, and that is the example that I think millions of Muslims across the globe experience, but also certainly non-Muslims who can relate to perhaps a connection with a divine transcendent power or being, and that is the instance of prayer. What does it mean for you all to think about how I engage in prayer? As some of you may know, Muslims are religiously prescribed or required to pray 5 daily prayers. And what that means is 5 times a day we engage in ritual washing, or ablution, if you want the technical term, wudu in Arabic. And 5 times a day we engage in ritual prostration, ritual bowing. We recite Quranic supplications and verses. And we communicate our needs and our experiences to who we believe is God. Personally speaking, prayer is an act of divine connection, as well as a means of connecting myself to a metaphysical and spiritual sustenance for my soul, and even grounding myself in a transcendent purpose. But using that interlens methodology, we want to ask ourselves, how do you all experience my act of prayer? How do you understand it? How do you make sense of it? To make this more tangible, perhaps you can imagine yourself walking by and you see a fellow peer or colleague or friend in their dorm room as they're praying their evening prayers. Or perhaps you walk by somebody in their a colleague at work and you see them in their workspace with their face on the ground in prostration. How do you make sense of that? What would your reaction be? What has your reaction been? Is it the usual you do you, bro kind of attitude? Or is there a kind of like a way we can lean into it, perhaps? Lean into that interlens snapshot. I don't want to use interfaith, but interlens snapshot, where you might not have the same sets of beliefs or values or perspectives or attitudes about prayer or the metaphysics of it or what have you. If Omar believes that prayer grounds him in a deeper reality, how do you view yourself in relation to that world? How does Omar view you in relation to that world? Is there a deeper reality that you both share? Do my beliefs cohere or rub against Omar's view of things? If you try to think about these questions a lot, you'll run into some sticky points. I'm sure I do it all the time. I think about these things and I'm quite concerned and confused. How can people from different backgrounds make sense of their views of things? But there is a bright side, and that is you learn a lot about yourself when you engage in that practice. For one, when you think about the power of the fact that somebody might believe something totally different, you're confronted with questions about what you believe, how you make sense of the world. Perhaps you might think about how you try to answer some of those questions that your peers or colleagues claim they have the answers to. Perhaps you might even ask questions about why you might have your certain philosophical or theological or spiritual or religious leanings that might be similar or different from your friends or peers or your community or your colleagues. You ask yourself what stakes you have for taking certain beliefs or values. Ultimately, you have to ask yourself, what effect does it have in the world? Does my certain perspective or lens affect how I navigate my interactions, my job choices, my career, my interpersonal relationships? And I can say through my few years of interreligious, interspiritual, interpersonal exploration, I've seen the value, personally and with others, of leaning into those potential instances of consternation and pause and even confusion, sometimes vehement disagreement, something gets bad. But it's also a place where you learn a lot about yourself and a lot about others. For one, you can at the very least say that you know where somebody's coming from. You might end up sharing their beliefs or values or disagreeing with them vehemently. But it's in instances like that where you can say that you have at least engaged honestly, authentically, intentionally in a pursuit of pluralism, cooperation, and coexistence. It's when you know how to situate your life in the lives of others, and your life, situate yourself in the lives of others and the lives of others in yours. That's really challenging because it takes us out of our mini silos or compartments of thought. But it's certainly valuable. And it's also really vulnerable. You put yourself in that situation, it's a very vulnerable act. Because when you allow yourself to wear the lenses of others, you are saying, hey, it's okay for me to expand my thoughts, to grow a little bit. But it's also really brave, because it means that you're invested. It means you're invested in building bridges with the others, building bridges with your peers, your friends, your colleagues, your family, who you may or may not see eye to eye with. So when we reflect about the differences of our perspectives or lenses, religiously, spiritually, philosophically, or what have you, the ones that hit at the core of our existence, I invite us all to potentially simmer in those contentious moments, in those disagreements about what the world is, those big questions of meaning and value and truth, and to perhaps wear the lenses of your friends or colleagues. Maybe, just maybe, you'll like what you see. Thank you very much.
We're going to open it up once more for reflections. And this can be a moment for you to turn back to one of the neighbors that you got to know a little bit better and ask them what their thoughts were on Omar's talk. All right. Thank you all. And with that, our conference has drawn to a close. And we hope you all enjoyed your time and that you were able to take something from this conference, whether it be from one of the talks, a point one of the audience members raised, or even an inspiration from within. It has been an immense honor to have all of you here today. And we'd like to thank our board and our tech staff, Nathan Botero and Sam Herbert. And finally, a very round applause for our inspirational TEDx speakers, Junaid Yu, Usman Ghani, and Omar Hawam. Thank you very much.